Hello and welcome to Tar Heel Teachers Presents, a conversation about foster care in North Carolina. I'm Marlo Artis. May is National Foster Care Month, and we are very fortunate to have a great lineup to discuss foster care in our state. Join us are Sara Bigley, the State Education Agency Foster Care Point of Contact, Tanya Deshields Jordan, Supervisor of School Counseling and Social Work and the Foster Care Point of Contact for New Hanover County Schools, and Douglas Price, Foster Care Alliance of North Carolina board member. He's also a foster care and adoptive parent. Thank you all so much for joining us here on this special.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're so glad to have each of you here. So from your vantage points, and each of you are coming from different lens, give us your assessment and your thoughts in terms of how foster care looks in North Carolina.
So I can maybe start. Maybe I would start with just doing a little bit of an overview of ESSA foster care, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And so thank you for that introduction. Again, my name is Sara. I'm the SEA Foster Care Point of Contact here in North Carolina. And in 2015, the Every Student Succeeds Act was signed into law. And so for those who may not be familiar, the Every Student Succeeds Act reauthorized the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. And when that was done, it included specific provisions and protections for students in foster care. And so the provisions really complement the Fostering Connections Act of 2008. Fostering Connections was on our under child welfare. And so now with ESSA, when ESSA passed, we really have this wonderful joint agency effort with ESSA foster care. And so it has a real focus on providing school stability for our students in foster care and joint agency collaboration, which is so important for this wonderful work. It takes all of us together doing this to support our children in foster care. So that collaboration, that ongoing work is just so important. We know that our students in care are very highly mobile. They have more unscheduled school changes than peers and often undergo more trauma and more traumatic experiences. So again, that interagency collaboration is so important for this work. And I'll say that over and over again. I'm so appreciative to everyone doing this work and being here and their passion and advocacy for our kids in care. Also, I did want to mention too that every, and some folks don't realize this, every LEA, local education agency, or I think we're migrating over to public school unit, and every DSS agency has a foster care point of contact. And so when a student comes into care that's of school age, pre-K-12, or has a placement disruption, our child welfare counterparts, our wonderful counterparts, contact our public school unit or our LEA points of contact to schedule a best interest meeting, best interest determination meeting. And those are based on all student-centered factors for our kiddos and young adults. And so just again, also want to take the opportunity before I forget to thank everyone that's involved in our bids, to thank all of our foster parents, our child welfare folks, and our school folks coming together who come to the bids to do this wonderful work, and also our transportation people. Whenever I have an opportunity to thank our folks in transportation across North Carolina do such an amazing job. And I just am just very appreciative to them. So that's a little bit about ESSA foster care. And for me, I support all things foster care under ESSA, collaboration. I do a lot of training and technical assistance and support. I'll always say anything that a DSS agency or a school needs, I am in it for our kids. So yeah, that's a little bit about ESSA foster care.
Thank you.
I'll talk for a moment about from a school perspective. When, as Ms. Bigley was referring to the best interest determination meetings, when they happen, the Health and Human Services Department in New Hanover County, we work very closely with our Health and Human Services, also formerly known as DSS. That social worker, when a child comes into foster care or has a foster care change, contacts either myself or the school social worker and sets up that meeting. And from the DSS side, or Health and Human Services side, they invite those individuals that would play a part in making a decision as to whether or not that child will stay at their school of origin, the school that they were in before the foster care placement happened or the change happened, or whether or not they would go to the district school of their new foster care home. So when those meetings are set up, the foster care social worker from DSS invites those appropriate individuals from their side, maybe the foster care parent, sometimes the child when appropriate, sometimes the guardian ad litem. They're all invited to those meetings. And on the school side, we invite the counselors and social workers, administrators, teachers, coaches, anyone who might have good input about what would be best for the child. And the good thing about those meetings is that it's not one person saying that this child should go to one school or the other. It's a team effort where everyone talks about what's best for the child. It has nothing to do with the cost of transportation. It has nothing to do with who wants the child to go where. It's a team conversation as to what's best for that child. And once a decision is made from the team, then if the child stays at their school, great. They've already know people there. But if there is a placement change and they go to a different school, then in New Hanover County, our counselors and social workers are so great in having a warm handoff so that the school that the child is currently in, that counselor or social worker, usually and or social worker, will make sure that new counselor and or social worker knows about those things that are important to have that child have a smooth transition. We are all about making sure that we are trauma sensitive. One of the things that our counselors and social workers teach at the beginning of the year is something called, what's recommended is a TLC alert. And the TLC alert, Tender Love and Care Alert, is where they teach the teachers that from time to time, the counselor and or social worker will have a TLC alert for a particular child. And that means that child is going through some kind of change in their life, a difficulty. It might be the death of a parent. It might be experiencing homelessness. It might be a foster care situation. It could be many different things. But it gives the teacher the opportunity to know that if that child is not him or herself, then they may need to get some additional supports from the student support staff in that building. It also just gives us an idea of something may be going on with that child. We also share that only on a need to know basis because of protecting the child's confidentiality, but also allows us to be able to wrap our arms around that child and give that child the support he or she needs. Make sure they get the referrals that they need in a timely manner, make sure that they're handled with grace. And I just love the opportunity to be able to make sure that all children have the opportunity to be treated with a trauma sensitive manner, because when they're going through something, that's of course exactly what they need.
That's so true. What about you, Doug? Tell us about your perspective.
So I'm certainly coming to this from a lot of different angles, both being a 12-and-a-half-year classroom teacher who's had experience with children who are in foster care, but I'm also a foster parent, licensed foster parent here in my county and district, and also serving as a board member for the statewide Foster Family Alliance. And I really want to capitalize on something that Tanya mentioned, which was about these, what we would call under the umbrella trauma-informed practices. Because something I think is really critical is that there has been a subtle but necessary movement in lots of organizations when it comes to trauma-informed practices, which has really helped with these conversations with children who are in foster care. And my own personal anecdote was actually just a conversation I had yesterday in trying to register one of my children who are in foster care, but that are here at my home, registering them for swimming classes. And there was a series of questions that the instructor was asking me that I thought was very interesting, because it was a little off-putting in the moment that why would a swim instructor be asking me these questions about, does your child prefer male or female? Does your child have any triggers to people with red hair, brown hair, X, Y, or Z, fill in the blank? And there was a whole list of questions that I had to go through with this swim instructor in order to just register this child, because what this swim class was doing was it was recognizing that my child was coming from a place where trauma most likely exists. And they were trying to be cognizant of that fact, and they were trying to be very sensitive to that. And what better way to be sensitive but to ask some of those questions up front and giving to the best of my knowledge. And so I think it's been fantastic to see and hear that not only schools are employing these trauma-informed practices, but there are also other organizations that exist out here who are working to partner with children who are in our foster care system, and also those parents, both the foster care parents and the biological parents, as well as the DSS workers and everybody else, the whole team that everybody's been mentioning tonight, of making sure that we are giving a holistic approach to treating the child and to partnering with that child to help elevate them so that they can be as successful as possible with where they are. The other thing that I really think is that is critical to point out, and it's a number, is 11,000. So this is not an accurate number. This is just an approximation, but there's approximately 11,000 children just in the state of North Carolina who are currently in the foster care system from ages birth through age 18. And there are not enough licensed foster care placement families to house those 11,000 0 to 18-year-olds.
Mhm.
Just think about how large North Carolina is.
Mhm. And let's talk about that in terms of being a licensed foster care parent. So I want to talk about training for foster care parents, but also want to talk about training that we provide for educators and other caregivers who are supporting our students.
So I'm certainly happy to take this as the foster care parent and also as the teacher, but please, Tanya and Sara, please interject on anything. So there is a program called the MAP program, which is what any individual or family who is going through, who wants to be licensed through their county as a foster care parent, that they go through, and it's a curriculum that they walk through, and it's a very lengthy process. It's not a 6-week program and you're done and you get your seal of approval after you sign all the paperwork. When my wife and I went through it, it took us a year just to go through the licensing process. And that licensing process was going through the curriculum. Again, I'm not including signing of the paperwork or anything else that's involved with that. I'm talking about just walking through and getting the delivery of that curriculum embedded into us. And that MAP programming is all about those trauma-informed practices that we talked about. But there's another critical term that we haven't brought up that I put down on my notes that I wanted to make sure that we mentioned, that to me personally and to my wife personally is very crucial, and what put us in the state of being a foster care parent is reunification. The ultimate goal of partnering and surrounding these children is not to just surround the children, but it's to surround their family as a whole unit. Whether that's grandparents that they're coming from, if that's their biological parents that they're coming from, because the ultimate goal should always be that the reason that we are stepping in to serve as foster parents is to help rebuild a family so that they may reunify. Sometimes adoption happens, and there are conversations that happen around that, and that is certainly another aspect of the conversation, but the number one goal should always be reunification when that is a possibility. And that's exactly what that MAP program walks you through, is that the ultimate goal is to get there. As a teacher, again, really highlighting those trauma-informed practices. Those are certainly things that when I was serving in my county before I moved to my new director of programs role that I'm in now, that, throughout the year, we would always have at least 2 to 4 professional developments that were offered to us throughout the year to help us have trauma-informed practices that were very all-encompassing. It wasn't just pinpointing that this is just for children who are in foster care, but this is, this is for children who exist within these spaces, and they might exist in multiple spaces.
And I think overall, my experience has been, I think that's happening in most of our counties now. I think there's really been an increased focus on having trauma-informed practices and trauma-informed schools. It's providing those safe spaces is good for all children, and particularly good and supportive for our students who have been in foster care, who are in foster care, or have undergone other traumas. So, I think that's a really wonderful thing that has been going on. Yeah.
One thing we do in New Hanover County is that every year we teach staff on our different student support services policies. And one of the things we do talk about is foster care. And we talk about some of the statistics that are related to students in foster care, about how they change so many schools, how that affects their academics with loss of credits, loss of extracurricular activities, loss of educational services sometimes, how it affects them, how many living changes they have, how many school changes they have more than any other child, how that affects them, how they're more likely to be absent from school, how they're more likely to be in special education, how they're more likely to read on a lower level, how they're less likely to graduate on time, less likely to go to college. And I think that's important because it gives the opportunity to think outside of a bubble, because oftentimes people have not experienced foster care close and personal. So it's important that we share these statistics so that the people who serve these children think outside their own bubble and think of ways, innovative ways, to make sure that the children that sit in front of them don't become part of the negative statistics. Yeah. Make sure that they have the extra support so that they're able to retain their credits or go on to the next grade level. Make sure that they have the class choices so that they're able to go to college. Make sure that they have the support so it's not just they get into college, they're able to go to college and graduate from college. So I think it's so important that we make sure that, if we have not experienced foster care ourselves, that we understand that these children, I talked to Sara earlier today, and I was thinking, how would I feel if, I had to leave my home and live in another home tonight and go somewhere else the next day. Mm-hmm. So that next day at work, I might have my head down on my desk because I'm exhausted from that move. The same thing happens to children in foster care. Mm-hmm. They don't always there's no one that's raising their hand saying, I want to be removed from my one home and have to be dislocated to a different home. So we have to think outside our bubble. How would we feel that next day? Another thing that I encourage our counselors and social workers to do is to have teachers have a bulletin, especially for our elementary kiddos, is to have a sign on their door that has the children to take a sticky with their name on it and to indicate where they are emotionally that day, whether they're doing great, whether they're kind of meh, or whether they're really having a sad day and they need a check-in. Then counselors and social workers can go by each door, pick those children up who need an extra check-in. Mm-hmm. And be proactive before there's a behavior disruption or that child has spent a whole day feeling sad and bad without someone making a contact. So those proactive measures are so important in making sure that our children, not just our children in foster care, all of us sometimes have a bad day and need help, but we just know that these children have different circumstances, so they really need additional supports and to be kind of case managed in a way that we make sure that they have all the supports in line so that those negative statistics don't become theirs.
Yeah.
If I can capitalize on something that Tanya was hitting on just a minute ago, as she was talking about informing the teachers of some of these concepts that we have to think outside of the box for children who are in foster care. One of the things that has become very predominant in my own work as a foster care advocate for these children has been, and I'm trying to think about how to say this gracefully, but the lack of policies that exist to help our children who are placed in foster care to be as successful as possible. And I'm going to give you a great one, and this is going to tie into Leandro, which is a great bigger conversation to have, right? But so, you know, we take in the youngest. That's what we are licensed for right now, my wife and I, 0 to 5. And we tend to take in just the tiniest ones. And one of the frustrations that we have had is that there is currently no policy in place that when a child enters into foster care, that there is an immediate opportunity that's available for them that's going to help both the child and the family with daycare or preschool. Now, a subsidy is provided financially. That's an immediate. What's not immediate is a guaranteed placement into a school or to a setting to allow them to be able to be put into a highly qualified setting. And that's problematic. And so I think about where I live, which is a highly urbanized setting, which has lots and lots and lots of daycares. So I'm all about numbers. So my magic number was 23. It took me 23 daycares to call in our area when we got our first placement a couple years ago, before I could find the first school that said, yes, we will take your placement. And we will prioritize them and allow them to be in this. And there's a lot more caveats that get thrown into that. So this is a very broad conversation that I'm presenting. So just keep that in mind. But there is a lack of policy that exists in our state that does not support this marginalized group of children with where they are and with the situations that they're living through. And it continues to, I think unintentionally, it exacerbates their marginalized state.
Or did you want to say something?
I was going to just jump in real fast. Both of you made me think of a couple of things. And to jump back a little bit in terms of training, like for training ESSA foster care, and Tanya knows this, I do trainings not every day, but almost every day. That training, ongoing training, technical assistance and support for student support personnel, for administrators, for data managers, for district leadership. But some of the things that Tanya was talking about, I often also start the trainings with, and I refer to it as that compelling why. So we know what the law is, okay, we know what it says, but before we even get there, I always start with similar information. You know, what is the state of our children in foster care? How did we get here? You know, what is really happening with them? What is the reality of what they experience, so that people can start to really try and empathize with what our children are experiencing and going through. It's that compelling why. You know, I often said as a principal, it was hard for me, and we had a lot of very purposeful planning, weekly planning and monthly planning, in-depth planning. And it was hard for me in my school to keep one grade level in the same place at the same time. And we had pacing guides, we had this planning, but that one would be a couple days ahead of another, you know. And so I often say, think about our children in care who, through no fault of their own, now, as we've discussed, have been moved. They don't even usually want to leave their homes, as challenging as the families' situations are experiencing. And now they've been moved across the district, potentially to a foster home, or across a county line into another county. Now that school may be weeks ahead. And so again, that's where it goes back to those student-centered factors that we were talking about the best interest, and really getting people to understand in the schools and well, whoever listened to me really about our children, put it in their place. It's hard for us to change as adults, as Tanya said. It's hard to go to a new job. We don't know what that work culture is going to be like, what our coworkers are going to be like. So again, just trying to get folks to really engage and understand what our children in care are experiencing and how they feel when they're going into a completely new situation where they don't know anyone. And some of those wonderful things that New Hanover is putting in place it's just terrific. It's so student-centered, and it's just on point in terms of providing a safe environment and safe spaces and trauma informed, all of that. But that compelling why. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So important to be able to kind of sit in the student's shoes. As I've been doing and reading, I was telling Tanya before we started filming, as I have been reading and watching documentaries about it, I have really situated myself in their shoes, in a sense that I could have been in the foster care system if my grandmother did not raise me. My grandmother raised me since I was 9 months old. And so, you really have to be empathetic and understand that could be you or somebody in your family, because individuals are placed into foster care because of various situations and various hardships. And so I'm glad Doug also mentioned too about reunification. That is the goal, because just because they're temporarily taken out of the home doesn't mean that at some point they cannot be put back in the home with their family. So I'm glad that we have noted that. We talk a lot about or hear a lot about the foster care system being a broken system. Now, you all have seen foster care for many, many years. What are some of the improvements that you have actually seen over the years where we're actually increasing our supports and our resources that we're providing for students in foster care?
Well, I'll speak for New Hanover County. What we do for all students is we have, this year we have increased our counselor and social work load so that most schools have a counselor and a social worker, but every school has either or in their building. We have access oftentimes on campus to school-based mental health for students who need therapy, so they don't have to disrupt their school day by leaving the campus. They can get their therapist meetings right there at school. So I think those things, having the support, having the numbers there of people who can support all students who need support. But of course, we focus in on those students who are, if we think of an MTSS model, though tier 3 who need the most support. I'm just really tickled at the opportunities that we have in New Hanover County to support these students, because we have the numbers of people, we have the positions available. So that has been a great improvement for us. And from my position, I look back and I'm really smile, because I know that we can continue to do better. We can continue to do more and more. We can expand our programming because we have the people there. We have the warm bodies that are willing and compassionate and passionate about serving students.
And we need those bodies, because Sara and I were talking earlier in the week about people getting burned out when you have these huge caseloads and it's hard for you to manage. When I worked in Sampson County and I started, for 8,500 students, we only had 2 school social workers for the whole county. And now that number has increased, but you notice that especially when you start moving to certain communities and, in marginalized communities. So we definitely have to have those people in place.
Absolutely. It's true. I think with foster care, just in the most recent years, I've really seen the great work when our folks get together and have those really meaningful bid meetings and really are student centered. And I've really seen, it's so encouraging to me, because particularly within a county, I've seen, our both of our agencies really working better together. We share the children, and you know, this law is bringing us together. And I've just seen really increased advocacy too, which is really wonderful when you hear about a student who's, you know, I've tons of stories, as I'm sure you all do, where a student, you know, it's February and they're potentially having their 5th move and they're in, you know, 7th grade. And a principal is like, wait a minute, you know, okay, that placement didn't work. Are we going to have a bid meeting? And they contact the point of contact, you know, and then then the point of contact is, you know, contacting the DSS or HHS agency or DHS agency, you know, and then everyone's getting together. So I've really seen that teamwork, and you know, we have lots of great work still to do, but we have made some really great strides in that too. And the advocacy, I'm so encouraged to see that, and the more trauma sensitive practices for our kids. I just, that's been very encouraging.
And I will put on my board hat now at the Fostering Family Alliance. And one thing that I'm really proud to see that our organization has really worked hard for is the most recent House Bill 769, which is the Foster Parents Bill of Rights. One of the things that's probably most unknown to individuals until they enter into that curriculum to become licensed foster parents is that in the state of North Carolina, foster parents actually do not have any rights whatsoever. And when I say that they don't have any rights, I'm not talking about rights to a child, but what I'm talking about is rights to have a voice that comes to the table to advocate for the child. The child ends up in a full-time placement in these homes. And it's those parents who end up being supplemental for the moment and may eventually, you know, in some instances that may move to a more longer term or adoptive situation. But those parents are living with those kids long-term, full-time, and are often the ones who are taking the kids to school, who are sitting down doing homework, who are feeding those kids, who are making sure that they have all the meals that they need and are necessary, and are also dealing with the emotions and physicalities and everything else that it takes to raise a child. And in the state of North Carolina, there is currently no space offered for a parent, a licensed foster parent, to sit at the table to advocate for what does a child need. The current situation is that I, as a foster parent, have a social worker who's assigned to me, and I should be divulging any information to that social worker, and then I have to depend on that social worker to then go and divulge that same information to the holistic team that Tanya and Sara have talked about previously. And so House Bill 769 is meant to kind of capitalize on that holistic viewpoint in saying we want to hear the foster parents being brought to the table again, not to fight for the kid to be taken away from their parents, because again, reunification should be the #1 goal when you're talking about foster care. If you're not talking about reunification, you're doing it wrong. But making sure that those parents, those foster parents, have a place and a seat at the table so that they can share, hey, you know what? On Wednesdays and Fridays, Joe has a very tough time because of X, Y, Z factors, whatever those factors are, maybe because he hates his math homework, because he hates math, because he hates soccer practice, because he hates the broccoli that we put on his plate, you know, fill in the blank of whatever it is, to allow those foster parents to have a place to come to the table, have a seat at the table, to be able to talk about those things. And so I'm really proud of that work that's been pushed forward and that has been brought forth. And we just found out last week that that bill passed in the House unanimously and was moved over to the Senate. And then it is now sitting as a referral to the Committee on the Rules and Operations in the Senate. So now we are just waiting to see where it goes from there, but we have our fingers crossed that this will be movement towards, again, providing a more holistic picture with a more holistic team sitting at the table to surround these children and their parents, families, whoever, with the love and support that they need to be successful.
Mhm. There is so much to talk about. I wish we had more time to discuss this, the work that you all do, and the way that you're advocating for our students and our children. It's so important. So thank you so much for joining us. As we wrap up this conversation, what else do you want to leave our audience with? What's something that we have not talked about that you want to make sure that our audience knows as it relates to foster care in North Carolina?
I would say just continue to think outside of your bubble. Think outside of your experience, think outside of your childhood, think outside of your privileges when working with children. Always offer grace and compassion, and take the time to ask or to ponder about what may have happened to that child or what that child may have been through. Before you rush to any type of judgment. I think that's so important. We all have the opportunity to be a protective factor for a child. If we think about adverse childhood experiences, we all have in ourselves the ability to provide a child something positive that will balance out. We can't erase a negative impact that a child may have experienced, but we can provide a really positive one for them. So I just think that I encourage all the educators, all the humans, to just think about within their walls, within their four walls of their offices and their school buildings, how they can make differences in the lives of children every day.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say act with grace. And, it can take just one caring adult to be, that protective factor to add to that toolkit for a student, for a child, a young adult, and, to help them in the moment when they need it. And sometimes we don't see that in that moment. Sometimes we're doing things and, we don't see that. And then, we might learn years later that meant a terrific amount to that student. It made all of the difference to that child. And just taking a moment to breathe, to be present with them, and to provide them supports that they need, or connect them to someone that can provide that, because we're all in this together. We need each other. We all need each other. So, yeah.
There's a lot to say at the end, right? Tons of resources to go to. You can, follow myself and other people on Twitter and other social media to find that kind of stuff. But I do want to highlight what Tanya said, and what was thematic for Sara as well, which is empathy. To live in this space as a foster parent and to not just empathize with what the child is going through, but to empathize with what the family is going through. I have been pushed to, not quite to my breaking point, but to places that I just never realized that my soul could really get to, in learning what it really meant to empathize with another human being. And so I just challenge anybody who's listening to this to really push yourself to think about what can you do to empathize with those that are around you, because we don't know everybody's story when they're sitting right in front of us, right? And that's part of the story of being a foster parent, is that when these children come into our care in our home, we don't often know their stories for a long time. Sometimes it might even be a year. It might even be beyond a year before we learn the whole story, if we ever learn the whole story. Mm-hmm. But their story, knowing the facts and the details, isn't always what matters. What matters is that they are a human being, that they are sitting here and that they need love. They need care. They need support. They need to know that there is a team that rallies here. So what I would love to say more than anything, and I read this on my note here, so sorry if I keep glancing away, but I want to say thank you to all the social workers in North Carolina. Teachers have a hard job, and I can say that because I was a teacher for 12 and a half years. Social workers have a very hard job. And I cannot thank the social workers enough for the thankless, very thankless work that they do in this state for the families that are here in North Carolina. I want to say thank you to the teachers and the principals and the school counselors and the other school personnel who works in this holistic unit to partner alongside these families and to really give that love and attention to that children when they are in their care from 8 to 3, 7 to 2, whatever their time is that they have them in school. And I want to say thank you to the foster parents who have opted to be licensed to take these kids into their home. One of the things we didn't even get to hit on today was that there is a differentiation on licensing, that you can be licensed to take a very specific subset of children into your home. And so thank you to anybody who chooses to step into that space. And then to the biological children and parents and their families. I want to tell you that we love you. And we are here to rally and support you and to help you rebuild your lives, to do and whatever that looks like, whatever that part of that story means for you. We are here to just embrace you and not to judge you.
Awesome. I echo all of those sentiments. Thank you all so much for being a part of this special conversation. May is National Foster Care Month, but the work is year-long, and you all do it with such grace and such passion. So thank you for sharing your stories and expertise with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Marlo.
Thank you for having us and doing this segment. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. We also like to thank our audience so very much for joining us on our social media platforms. Please like us on Facebook at Tar Heel Teachers. Please follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Tar Heel Teachers. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and on all of our social media platforms, please use our hashtag Tar Heel Teachers so we can find all of your great comments. Again, thank you so much to everybody who is connected to the foster care system and all of the individuals who support this great work. We look forward to seeing you soon.